nombre es Matías Febres y soy estudiante de la carrera de Administración y Negocios del Deporte. La industria deportiva en el mundo es gigantesca, mueve millones de dólares al año, y la industria deportiva en el Perú seguramente con los años ha ido creciendo bastante, se ha ido formalizando. Hay muchas empresas que en la actualidad tratan de venir ya a invertir un poco más, hay personas que están mucho más capacitadas para el tema deportivo y están tratando de gestionar sus propias empresas para formalizar un poco más todos los temas o todos los deportes que quizás no tienen más exposición. Un egresado de la carrera de Administración y Negocios del Deporte puede trabajar administrando, gestionando federaciones deportivas, clubes deportivos, siendo agente de jugadores, pero también tiene la capacidad de trabajar en empresas que no están relacionadas con el rubro, pero que vemos en la actualidad que están creciendo muchísimo y están usando activos como patrocinios con entidades deportivas o apalancando campañas de publicidad con deportistas para poder mejorar el engagement con su marca, ¿no? En la actualidad la UPC es la única que tiene una carrera que está ligada a la gestión deportiva. Seguramente hay muchas otras universidades o instituciones que tienen carreras deportivas pero tienen un enfoque totalmente distinto. La carrera me ofrece el tema de la doble titulación, ¿no? Puedo tener titulación tanto en administración y en negocios del deporte. Y además la carrera, por la red que tiene muchísimos convenios internacionales que nos pueden brindar a nosotros muchas facilidades o ir a compartir a otros países. Creo que los convenios que tiene la universidad nos ayudan a enriquecernos muchísimo, conocer de otras culturas, conocer cómo nació ese deporte, cómo se está gestionando en otro lado y poder aplicar esas mismas medidas en la industria del país, ¿no? Además, creo que es importante mencionar que la universidad ha sido escogida por sexto año consecutivo la universidad más internacional y creo que eso da fe del trabajo que se está haciendo con los alumnos. El tema de las misiones académicas en la universidad son programas súper importantes que nos brindan a nosotros los alumnos. Son viajes muy cortos a otros países, son viajes de una semana, 15 días, donde uno puede planificar y en realidad son bastante beneficiosos para nosotros los alumnos, tanto en el tema académico como el de vivir experiencias que nos enriquezcan, ¿no? Como personas. Nos brinda la capacidad a nosotros los alumnos de poder tener una doble titulación estudiando aquí y salir con un grado de bachiller de la UPC y de la Universidad de Arizona, desde el mismo país sin necesidad de tener que moverte. Es importante recalcar que la carrera de Administración y Negocios del Deporte está dentro de la Facultad de Negocios de la universidad. Por ello llevamos todos los cursos de administración y hay un 30% que está mucho más enfocado en el tema de la gestión deportiva, que en realidad nos ayudan mucho a ser mucho más específicos en nuestro trabajo y poder insertarnos en el mercado laboral del deporte, ¿no? La UPC es una universidad que realmente apuesta mucho por el deporte, tiene infraestructura que nos sirven un montón. El campus en el que yo estudio, que es el campus de Villa, ofrece muchas instalaciones deportivas, tiene un gimnasio, una piscina olímpica, tiene una cancha de fútbol profesional, pista de atletismo, cancha de futsal, de básquet, de vóley. En realidad, en tema de infraestructura es muy completo y además brinda muchísimos beneficios como el formar parte del equipo de la universidad. Nos dan descuentos en la matrícula y en realidad eso te motiva muchísimo a poder seguir teniendo tu pasión y seguir practicándola a la par de que estás estudiando y te estás desarrollando en tu carrera. Con la formación que me ha dado la universidad, aspiro a poder potenciar muchísimo la industria que me apasiona. Yo me veo de aquí a muchos años quizás teniendo una empresa propia que pueda formalizar el tema deportivo con representación de jugadores, realización de eventos deportivos o trabajando como el gerente de marketing de alguna marca deportiva muy importante, donde yo me sienta muy cómodo, ¿no? Y donde pueda ayudar a otras personas a cumplir el sueño que tienen de llegar a la alta competencia.
La carrera de Administración y Negocios del Deporte consiste en gestionar cualquier tipo de empresas, pero especialmente preparado para gestionar empresas deportivas.
Yo estoy en primer ciclo y es nueva la malla, entonces tiene cursos más administrativos, menos de ir a hacer el deporte, sino más en temas de lo que vas a trabajar, ¿no?
Todo lo que he visto en la universidad después lo he vuelto a ver en el trabajo y he sabido aplicar, por ejemplo, cosas de finanzas. Me decían, analiza si este proyecto está bien o no.
El primer año salí primero de la carrera y me gané la beca Laureate de la excelencia y me fui para Alemania a una universidad que justo tenía una parte deportiva dentro de sus carreras. Pasar por ese tipo de cosas junto con las herramientas que te brinda la carrera te da mucha seguridad porque estás en una situación bastante importante, súper especial, ¿no? No todo el mundo tiene la suerte y el privilegio de estar ahí.
Me parece que el enfoque de negocio es global, o sea, no te enseñan a trabajar acá, sino te enseñan a trabajar en cualquier parte del mundo.
No quisiera ser profesor de educación física, quisiera trabajar un poco más en la parte administrativa o gerenciar la empresa.
La carrera está combinada con administración. Entonces, por último, si es que no se desenvuelven en el sector deportivo, se pueden desenvolver en cualquier otro tipo de empresa. Y eso creo que es un backup bastante importante, ¿no? Porque te sientes seguro, por lo menos, y puedes seguir lo que quieres gracias a esta fusión de las dos carreras.
Hola a todos, les doy la bienvenida al Women on the Sport Summit 2025. un espacio creado con mucho entusiasmo desde la carrera de Administración y Negocios del Deporte de la UPC, con el firme propósito de seguir impulsando la participación de la mujer en la gestión deportiva. Hoy iniciamos el encuentro con una serie de entrevistas realizadas a 4 especialistas internacionales del movimiento olímpico, los cuales nos comparten sus reflexiones sobre el rol de la equidad de género en el deporte global, los avances logrados en los Juegos Olímpicos de París 2024 y los retos que aún enfrentamos de cara a Los Ángeles 2028. Nuestro objetivo con este evento es promover reflexiones necesarias, impulsar el liderazgo femenino en todos los niveles del deporte y, sobre todo, seguir construyendo un camino más justo, representativo e inclusivo para las futuras generaciones. Gracias por estar aquí. Los invitamos a disfrutar las entrevistas y seguir siendo parte del cambio.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Women in Sports Summit 2025. Thank you to everyone for tuning in from around the world to be a part of these powerful conversations on equity, leadership, and inclusion in sport. We're really excited to take you on a global journey through a series of exclusive interviews with experts and leaders who are driving change across continents. We will begin our journey in North America with a conversation between Dr. Yoav Dubinsky, an expert in sports diplomacy based in the United States, and journalist Liliana Michelina. Together, they explore the role of the Olympics in shaping national identity and promoting gender equity. Let's take a look. We are joined today by a researcher who brings us a unique but crucial perspective on Olympism and gender equity. Dr. Yoav Dubinsky is an expert in sports diplomacy, nation branding, and the use of sports as a tool for international projection. He's the author of Nation Branding and Sports Diplomacy, Country Image Games in Times of Change, where he analyzes the role of sports in shaping national image during the pandemic and in events such as Tokyo 2020. In this conversation, we will explore gender and diplomacy through the lens of his presentation titled Gender, U.S. Sports Diplomacy, and Brand America in the Olympic Movement. Welcome, Yoav.
Thank you, Liliana. Thank you for having me. And thank you all for having me in the Women in Sports Summit 2025. It's a pleasure to take part in it. And best of luck to the organizers and everyone who attends this very important summit.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us. To begin, what led you to explore the intersection of diplomacy, nation branding, and sport?
This is a very good question. This goes quite back in my life, in my career. If I'm going back really to childhood, and I didn't really call it that way, sports, nation branding, and public diplomacy. One of the ways that my parents would shut me up as a kid was to put me in front of VHS tape, videotape that our family doctor gave us of the Seoul 1988 Olympic Games. And I was just sitting there fascinated by the Taekwondo demonstration before even understanding what's going on. And that kind of trickled down and up in my mind in this intersection of culture and sports and an opening ceremony. And then later on, when I grew up, it made me as a part of why I'm so intrigued in the Olympics and sports. But from a more professional level, in the first mega sport event that I covered was the Beijing 2008 Olympic Games. I'm originally from Tel Aviv, Israel. And in Israel, I was a journalist and I covered sport events in Israel. But Israel doesn't host many major international sports events. Of course, there's the political and the security reasons for that, but also Israel is a pretty small country that doesn't have the facilities and capacity to host mega sport events. And being sent to Beijing to the 2008 Olympic Games, which were the biggest Olympic Games at that time and still one of the biggest in terms of infrastructure and public investment and overall what China tried to do in terms of exposing itself to the world, coming out of the walls and showcasing China as a powerhouse, that impacted me. And that impacted me also retroactively, seeing how I covered China in the preparations for the games, which oftentimes was focusing on some negative aspects of China. human rights violations and air pollution, on all kinds of public spending and all kinds of issues related to that. And as I went to China and experienced the great heritage and culture and food and tourism destinations while I was there, and also as as the Olympics you tend to shift from covering the surrounding to covering the athletic competitions themselves. When retroactively I started to think, and I was even pointed out, did you go there one year of and come back a different one? And I started to think, did they get to me? Did they manage to change the way that I'm covering? And as a social agent and a journalist who projects an image of whatever I'm writing about to a larger audience, I started to think, well, how do countries do that? And if China is doing it in all one way, how other countries have been doing that, are doing that. Obviously, China is not the first. We can go back, to ancient Greece or Berlin 36 or the Maccabiah Games in Israel or LA 84 or whatnot. There are country image and nation branding and public diplomacy intersections in all of them. Um, but that basically got me to dive deeper into it and then pursue an academic career around it, covering and researching basically the last 5 Olympic Games, writing books and articles and teaching in the US and whatnot. So basically, I would say as a child and cognitively, the Seoul 88 opening ceremony, as an adult and a professional, the Beijing 2008 Olympic Games.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, coming back to the present, in your book, you analyze the impact of the pandemic on sports diplomacy.
Yeah.
So, what role would you say Olympism played in this context of global crisis?
Oh, that's a very good question, because sports became one of the focal points or one of the most iconic moments of where the pandemic told the world you can't continue to do what you did before. The postponement of events, especially the postponement of the Tokyo 2020 Olympics, which had led to a trickle-down effect of other events in the following summers to be postponed. The fact that we were not able to gather together in person, the globalized nature of sports, of people and products transferring between countries, crossing national borders, are all impacted by the pandemic. And when we're looking at the pandemic, it was predominantly a health crisis, but it followed an intrigue, financial catastrophe, recession, meaning a financial crisis, an economic crisis, social crisis around the world, political crisis around the world. So it impacted all spheres of life. And sports played a role um, in escapism in some capacity, um, in at least somewhat of ability to watch something else. Also was a way of virtually connecting us, understanding that there is pain all around. All of us were affected by the pandemic, mostly negatively. Most of us negatively, some of us very negatively. And sport as well played a role in bringing us as a world together, in sharing some moments. With that said, it also emphasized that we are in unprecedented times, or not normal times, or in unsustainable times. And even watching the empty stadiums, if we thought, or if some of us thought that, well, the competition itself, for those watching on TV, is not really affected by fans. The fans in the stadium obviously are affected by the competition, but people on TV will enjoy the competition either way. The lack of fans impacted the experience altogether. And with that, because of the attention on through television, because of the social issues that arose with that, there are all kinds of stakeholders who took advantage or capitalized or not capitalized on that social protest. Were global. what happened around in the U.S. around George Floyd and the murder of George Floyd in the U.S. and protests about racial injustice in the U.S. spread across the world, spread across the U.S. into other issues about sport, about social justice, Native Americans, overall equity and inclusion, and spread across the world into other aspects of social justice, leading to the IOC allowing to kneel before competitions in Tokyo 2020. So we can see all kinds of manifestations of stakeholders trying to capitalize and use the platforms during the pandemic to have different social political demands and which affect from people-to-people diplomacy into nation branding diplomacy. We can go and dive into sports nation branding and public diplomacy in Tokyo 2020, in Beijing 2022, in the well, not so impacted by the pandemic, but just after the pandemic, Qatar 2022, all of them have their own impacts of sports nation branding and public diplomacy. And the pandemic definitely played a role in all of them. If just one word, Japan could not truly capitalize on the opportunities of nation branding and public diplomacy, partly because of the resistance of Japanese people who were still going in and out of state of emergency from the pandemic. I've been to the closing ceremony of the Rio 2016 Olympics, and at the end of each closing ceremony, there's a segment of passing of the flag and a segment of the next Olympics, and they had the Japanese had a hilarious segment of a lot of anime and showing different sides of Tokyo, and basically Shinzo Abe, the late prime minister there, basically stuck in traffic there and turning into Super Mario and coming out of the pipe in the Maracana Stadium. So this was supposed to be like, so the games were supposed to be about, well, the recovery of the trifecta of the 2011 earthquake, tsunami, and Fukushima nuclear disaster, celebrating the Japanese heritage and Japanese past, celebrating Japanese modernity, and also celebrating fun Japanese culture of anime and video games and so forth. And the pandemic changed that completely. They prevented Japan from doing that. So we can see impacts there. On the other hand, China used the games in Beijing 2022 that had very strong restrictions to basically show that they are capable of delivering games during the pandemic, that they are unafraid of diplomatic boycotts, and that they are a force that cannot be ignored. So we can see all kinds of manifestations of nation branding and public diplomacy during the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. It is interesting, and now that you mentioned that sports, at least institutionally, reject intrusions of politics and political discourse, which is what they call many times just manifestations of like a desire for social justice or human rights. The IOC is very explicit against those manifestations, and in fact, it was rare that they allowed some of that to happen in 2021. Isn't there a major contradiction there in the sense of sports institutionally reject politics while they completely allow their events and their platform to serve for nation building and diplomacy?
Sports is full with internal contradictions. The beauty and the peril maybe of sports, but I think the beauty of sports and the beauty of the human experience is that human experience is full with internal contradictions. I tend to say about the Olympic Games that they are a story about humanity. Not necessarily a good or a bad story, but just a story about how we treat each other and the planet we live in. And yes, they are full of contradictions, from the tension between participation and performance, and who are we celebrating? Are we celebrating 200 countries or delegations from 200 national Olympic committees in the world marching in the opening ceremony? Or are we celebrating the best of the best and the excellence and that tension? And that goes along into decisions that go through the games, including what does it mean to be politically neutral? And and as politically neutral, they try to shift, I would say they try to shift the language from apolitical to politically neutral over the last few years, understanding that politics is in some capacity in every sphere of life. And that is a challenge for the IOC to do so, as decisions are inherently political, and as when you have 200 countries or delegations coming together, many of them in some sort of conflict, whether armed or some historic background, that can explode or manifest during the games, which it has. So the IOC, the way that I see it, they try to control or manage that, of saying this is not acceptable. If we want to have the world come together for 16 days, there needs to be some restrictions of what you can say and when, and that indeed impacts freedom of speech. That indeed impacts questions of social justice and who can speak out and who cannot. So yes, there are definitely in internal contradictions that goes into the practicality and pragmatism of hosting basically the biggest event humanity holds at this point of time when you're talking about the Olympics.
Yeah, I mean, speaking about social justice issues, there's gender equity and that conversation. What place would you say gender equity holds within specifically US sports diplomacy?
Very central, and I would say in the US, the sustainable competitive advantage, especially in international sports, is the dominance of American women, especially in the Olympic movement. Not in professional sports in the US. Professional sports in the US are dominated by men's sport, predominantly NFL or American football, which doesn't have a professional or significant professional female counterpart or women's league. But internationally, in the Olympics, in the last few Olympics, women were the majority of Team USA. Women won most of the medals for Team USA. Because of American women, the US dominated, or finished first, I shouldn't say dominated, but finished first on the podium in the last Olympics. And pick a sport that the US cares about. American women will be very competitive, whether that's football, soccer, whether that's basketball, swimming, gymnastics, track, volleyball. If the US cares about that, that will manifest through performance. And a lot of it goes through Title IX and educational legislations from the 1970s that prohibits discrimination based on sex in the education system, or more precisely, says that if you that educational organization, meaning schools, high schools, universities, that receives federal fund, meaning every public university or public school, and also most private universities that get federal government or public money, in order to keep that money or to get that money, they must comply with a series of regulations related to Title IX, called Title IX, a series of regulations about prohibiting discrimination based on sex. And that has a lot of manifestations, but in the context of sports, it goes especially into equaling conditions, meaning amount of opportunities to play, level of conditions to play. So I'm at the University of Oregon. I'm a senior faculty at the University of Oregon, and the most revenue generating team sports is our college football team, which is a men's team. But because there are so many players on the men's team, we will need to have women's teams without a male counterpart. So we'll have a women's soccer team, and we will have a women's volleyball team, and we'll have a women's lacrosse team and whatnot. So we will have all kinds of opportunities for women, regardless if money is generated or revenue is generated or not. And like ourselves, it provides opportunities all across the US and trickles up to the US Department of State, who uses Title IX as part of its sports diplomacy or public diplomacy policies.
Mm-hmm. How is that projected to the outside world? How is that part of the consequences of the structure of sports in the US and the way it favors women in a way that it doesn't where in countries where there is no such legislation? How is that projected? How is that nation branding, nation building from the part of US sports?
So there are several ways. The US doesn't have a sports ministry. The US has its Department of State, that's basically the foreign minister. So the Department of State oftentimes uses Title IX and key female athletes to project American lifestyle, whether it's to have influencers or communities from abroad come to the US and meet them, or having them and top athletes as ambassadors in other countries. But more fundamentally, because of the investment in the collegiate system, it becomes very attractive for top female athletes around the world where they don't have a Title IX kind of legislation in their countries. And when going and where sports is developed for club sports, and club sports is oftentimes compete in an open market. And oftentimes women's club sports doesn't generate the same level of revenues as men's club sport, which create less opportunities or lesser facilities or not what. So as a result, international top athletes or represented their countries in whether youth level or even national level come to study in the US, compete in the American system, learn more about the American lifestyle, learn more about sports techniques in the American system, but also bring sports techniques from their own countries, have connections between their coach in their home countries and the coach of the university. So they exchange information, coaching techniques, technology used. So we have this intersection of how a system and a country and a culture is projected around the world, and also how the US accepts and is influenced by international female athletes who see opportunities in the American collegiate system and sports system that don't necessarily have in their own countries. Now, I should emphasize the US is not perfect, not even close to when it comes to gender equality, professional leagues. We see a rise in the WNBA and the NWSL in terms of expansions, but not even close to the men's leagues. And for most student athletes in most sports, the career ends at the university level because of lack of opportunities in professional sports or even in organized leagues in the US. And so the US Title IX is very significant. It's important. A bit counterintuitive to a certain degree also because it's a socialist law in the most capitalist country, but it doesn't solve all problems of gender equality.
No, not at all. Like you said, it does facilitate like an exchange of like know-how that is very important to US sports supremacy. Can you share some examples where women athletes have played a key role in shaping that international image of the United States? And well, related to that, I was also wondering if you see a different wait, let me rephrase that. Is there a different type of image shaping in places west or west adjacent versus places further removed from that reality for women?
Clarify what you mean. The first part of the question and understand. I'm not sure what
Okay.
you mean by the second part.
Yeah, what I mean is, do you see if there is from U.S. sports and the structures of U.S. sports and what they project to the outside world, if there is a different level of image shaping in places that are already like in the West or like West adjacent, such as like Latin America or like places in Europe that maybe contemplate certain benefits and access to sports for women that versus whatever image and whatever athletes and whatever stories they want to project and publicize in places further removed from that reality for women.
One of the most iconic teams that shaped sports in American society and overall the image of the US is the US women's national team. Starting predominantly through the 1999 Women's World Cup, where the US women's national team filled the stadium, filled the Rose Bowl Stadium, a 90,000 plus stadium in the US, one of the most famous and most iconic stadium in the US. And this is mostly because the athletes themselves were pushing to hold the competition in football stadiums, and were going to the community and persuading the community to come to support the team, and the community supported the U.S. women's national team through the final until beating China in penalties in the final in front of a full stadium, which is a landmark moment in women's football, showing that women's football can fill the Rose Bowl Stadium. The iconic celebration of Brandy Chastain of taking off her shirt and celebrating with a sports bra became an iconic moment. If you go outside of the stadium, there's a statue of her celebration right outside the Rose Bowl Stadium. The two most famous penalties that were taken in the FIFA World Cup were taken in that stadium. Roberto Baggio almost hit a satellite in 1994, and Brandy Chastain, who won the Women's World Cup, and that team, through their persistence of having better conditions, set a cultural standard for future teams and future U.S. women's national team players to continue to fight for gender equality and women's rights and overall social justice. And also for these players, whether that's Abby Wambach or Alex Morgan or Megan Rapinoe or Hope Solo or now a new generation, a much more diverse generation of Trinity Rodman and Mel Pugh and Sophia Smith, and generations of athletes who speak out, who project different forms of feminism. There's not just one form. Carly Lloyd, of course, Carly Lloyd, I cannot forget Carly Lloyd as from a performance standpoint, who's more of a Mia Hamm, Michael Jordan type of, it's all about the performance and perfecting your craft. They all set standards of participation, of performance, of unapologetically demanding excellence. If I go around the world and I'm looking at South America, and it's kind of funny because just yesterday, students of mine, I thought about Marta, the Brazilian soccer player, football player. I thought about yesterday, because of students of mine, they had a presentation of Serena Williams' beauty line, and I was thinking about Marta, who was arguably the GOAT of women's soccer, the best player ever, and also someone who plays with lipstick, who's also celebrating femininity along with performance and looking good while you're competing. And I think that this is a very strong message that was sent not just in the US but around the world, that you can be the best ever in your sport and still want to look good as you're doing that. It doesn't take anything away from femininity, women's rights, women all together. Hope Solo used to say she was very cognizant to her gear and what she and what she was wearing and how she came to the pitch. She said, I look good, I feel good, I play good. And I think that these are some messages that combine both, that sports should not um, deter people from participating and competing and being in the highest level possible, because of body image, or that a good athlete doesn't mean not looking good or not being feminine. So I think that we can see some of that.
Totally. That's one of the biggest deterrents for young women athletes. Looking ahead at the LA 2028 Olympics, Los Angeles 2028, as someone who is a researcher based in the US, what is your perspective on LA 2028, what it might represent in terms of gender equity?
Oh, it's good. Paris 2024 were games that the French said these are the first full gender parity games, same quotas for men and women. This is how they framed it. Going back to Paris 1900, where for the first time women participated in the Olympics. LA 28 takes it a step forward, saying we are going to have more quotas for women than men, basically shifting the football competition from 16 teams men and 12 teams women to 16 teams women, 12 teams men, and rightfully so, because the men's competition in the Olympics is kind of a hybrid and age competition with a few exceptional players. And the women's competition is the highest elite level competition in the world, parallel to the same teams that compete in, or same level of teams that compete in the FIFA World Cup, who managed to qualify for the Olympics. It will be the best players in that country. So for just from that point, right away, the organizing committee and the US projects we're going to have more quotas for women than for men for the first time in the Olympics. Alison Felix, that played a role in the big, the most decorated track and field athlete, now in the Athletes Commission, in the IOC's Athletes Commission, part of was part of the bid, part of the speakers of the bid, California-based, a very influential and significant athlete in terms of gender equality, in terms of motherhood, in terms of race equality. So so that is going to be significant. It remains to be seen which athletes who dominated the Olympics in previous years will compete, whether that will be Simone Biles or Katie Ledecky. But gender is going to play an important role in the games and in what the US wants to project. With that said, there are all kinds of other questions and challenges going into the LA Games. The political backlash about White House policies, climate change and wildfires in California are going to be a challenge. So there are going to be some challenges for LA, but part of the image that the US would like to show is inclusivity, diversity, and a lot of that will go through women and female athletes.
Mm-hmm. Speaking about that, how consequential will it be that this will be the first Olympic Games under female IOC president in Christy Coventry?
We should see that. That's definitely that is both significant. That yes, up until Christy Coventry, all IOC presidents were white men, and for the first time, a woman will lead the IOC. And that is significant with Christy Coventry, the most decorated, will be the most decorated IOC president when she come into office, a white African woman that is definitely diversifying the field of the top position in sport. But I should also say we should judge Christy Coventry based on her actions and policies, and not just based on her demographic background. But yes, it does signify change that a woman will be in the top position in sport. That is something that that for over 100 years the IOC did not have, and that is significant.
You mentioned that in spite of the challenges that, well, they are already facing in LA to pull this off, the general California and LA vibe, and also the message of inclusion, what kinds of symbols or communication strategies do you foresee being used to project that message of inclusion and diversity through sport?
So I would say several things. Gender will play a role. I think that gender and top female athletes will play a role that are California-based or have ties to California will play a role in the games. The overarching theme is follow the sun, kind of people going to California to find their dream. And to create a better future for themselves. And I think that the games will play a role in that, including the entertainment industry. The squash competitions will be in Hollywood, in Universal Studios, in the backlot where they filmed To Kill a Mockingbird and Back to the Future, next to the clock where the lightning hits and the DeLorean goes and whatnot. So Hollywood will play a role in that as well. Also, emphasis on sustainability, existing facilities, using the facilities in Los Angeles, the campuses of USC and UCLA, along with the facilities of professional sports teams. So I think that the cultural aspect of California and of Los Angeles, diversity and inclusion in terms of different populations that will take place in delivering the games, emphasis on gender in that, and also framing them as sustainable in terms of existing facilities will be some of the messages that will come out of LA 28.
Now, LA and California may be as progressive as they come, but these are also Olympic Games that are going to happen under the presidency of Donald Trump, who, speaking about message of inclusion and diversity, the policies of diversity, equity, and inclusion have come under fire in the very few months of his second presidency so far. How do you see that playing out, and that going back to contradiction in terms of the messaging?
I cannot predict the future. So, with that limitation, I would expect to have some visa issues, not necessarily by athletes, but perhaps fans, delegations. The US already is pretty difficult with visa issues, even under not under Trump's presidency and not necessarily Republican presidency. In both Republican and Democratic presidencies, visa issues are a challenge. We hosted the University of Oregon the 2022, the Oregon 22 World Athletic Championships. It was Biden administration. It was celebration of Title IX. There was a lot of celebration of 50 years to Title IX. But there were some visa issues that go into athletes, into delegations, long time that is processed. And when you're looking at the Olympic Games, which are several times more, and with Trump policies about visas, that's going to be, I assume that will have an effect on the games. Will that create protests or not, or with Trump's policies creating protests in Los Angeles or not? I don't know, because likely security will be pretty high during the games. Also, security in the U.S. We also need to take into consideration gun violence and lack of gun control, and history of the bombing in the Centennial Park in Atlanta in 1996. The rise of security cost in Salt Lake City 2002, following just a few months after 9/11. So I assume that security will be pretty tight. So we'll see if how much lenience will there be for protest against Trump's policies or overall protests during the games. There are also some questions about, not necessarily related to Trump, but changes in collegiate sports system, athletes that are allowed to get money, not allowed to get money, which might impact cutting off sports programs. that are not generating revenues. So that might impact. There's a strong approach of the Trump administration against inclusion of transgender athletes in collegiate sport. So that there's an ongoing debate on that in the world of sports, and we'll see how that will trickle up and down through that in sport. But I would say overall, I don't think the Trump administration is a threat for the Olympic movement. It's not. Trump does not want. Or I have not read anything from the White House of objecting to host the Olympic Games or putting significant restrictions on them.
Oh no, he's very happy with that.
But overall, it's going the social political climate will manifest through the games like it manifests in others, and Trump's administration definitely changes, shapes, influence the social political climate. We'll get a glimpse of that next summer with the FIFA World Cup, how that will look like.
Yeah, totally. We'll see how it evolves. It's changing every day. And 2028 is an election year too. So I'm sure that's gonna make it even more spicy. To close, what reflection would you like to share with those seeking to integrate a gender perspective into sports management and diplomacy?
Do it. That's the future, or part of the future. The sports business ecosystem is growing. It's not small, it's huge, and it's growing all the time, and the potential is growing. And what we see from struggles in the US is that whenever there's more investment in women's sports, the attendance and the viewership are higher. So it's never a one battle. It's a battle that is ongoing, and if you if you're not on there, you're gonna be left behind, and that pertains to every level from an individual, local, municipal, regional, or national into nation branding and public diplomacy and the image that you want to project.
Totally. It's the future. It's the present, actually.
It's fair enough. It's the present, yes.
Yeah.
The present, and it's gonna keep growing.
Yeah, totally. Well, thank you very much, Yoav, for this global and thoughtful perspective on the role of sports in diplomacy and in building a more gender equal national identity. I think you've given us important, valuable ideas to continue thinking about Olympism through an inclusive lens. And to our audience, we invite you to continue enjoying the Women in Sports Summit in 2025, where equity will remain at the heart of all of our conversations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you to Yoav and Liliana for starting us off with such an insightful reflection on sport and society. Now we're going to head across to the Atlantic and Europe for our next conversation. From France, we're joined by Professor Eric Menin, historian and Olympic expert, in conversation with Susan Econoville, professor of UPC. They discuss gender parity at the Olympic Games and how symbolic gestures like the Paris 2024 torch design can carry powerful messages about equality and inclusion.
Hello, everyone. Today we are honored to welcome a very special guest, as I mentioned before. In this opportunity, we're going to introduce to Dr. Eric Mona as part of the Women and Sports Summit 2025. I will tell you a little bit about him. It's going to be a short one. He's a French sport historian and sociologist specializing in the international Olympic movement. He is a full professor at the University of Franche-Comté, vice president of Olympism at the same university, and director of the University Center for Olympic Studies and Research. In 2013, he was awarded the prestigious Pierre de Coubertin Medal by the International Olympic Committee, becoming the first French recipient of this honor in recognition of his work promoting Olympic values among young people. He's currently working on a book titled Role Models in Sport Working with Youth, Promoting Olympic Education. And today, he joins us to reflect on gender equity in the Olympic movement, Olympic education, and his experience during the recent Paris 2024 Olympic Games. Welcome, Professor Eric. It's a truly pleasure to have you with us. Bienvenue, Professor Eric. C'est vraiment un plaisir de vous avoir parmi nous. On va commencer par les questions.
Oui.
We're going to start with the questions. Is it okay for you?
Yes, of course.
Perfect. You can answer in French, no problem. If you don't understand, just let me know, please. Okay, so first question. To begin, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Bien sûr, avec grand plaisir. Alors, donc, je m'appelle Éric Monin et je suis actuellement ambassadeur de mon université qui a changé, hein, qui a changé de nom il y a quelques semaines. Nous ne nous appelons plus Université de Franche-Comté, nous nous appelons maintenant Université Marie et Louis Pasteur. Et je suis ambassadeur de cette université et également directeur du Centre d'études et de recherche olympique universitaire. Ça, c'est une casquette institutionnelle, académique. Sinon, je suis également administrateur du Comité olympique français, membre au Comité international olympique de la Commission éducation.
D'accord, perfect. D'accord. How did your relationship with Olympism begin, and what inspired you to specialize in this field?
Alors, en France, nous ne travaillons pas forcément sur l'olympisme. L'olympisme n'est pas un champ forcément utilisé, étudié. Et donc, en fait, ma volonté a été rapidement d'essayer de comprendre pourquoi en France, on n'étudiait pas, on ne travaillait pas sur l'olympisme. Et je me suis aperçu qu'il y avait un objet d'étude incroyable à s'accaparer, à travailler pour essayer tout simplement d'envisager des pistes nouvelles de travail, de recherche universitaire dans ce domaine de l'olympisme. Et donc, en fait, j'ai été un peu précurseur de ce travail sur l'olympisme en France.
D'accord, d'accord. Également, c'est une curieuse question. Vous étiez un sportif de haut niveau aussi?
Oui, alors en fait, effectivement, vous avez raison, c'est que j'ai été membre de l'équipe nationale, de l'équipe de France, de judo, et cette vision du sport de très haut niveau en équipe nationale, en équipe de judo, m'a permis de parler, de côtoyer, d'échanger avec des athlètes olympiques, des champions olympiques. Et donc, en fait, de manière parallèle, j'ai travaillé sur le plan académique, universitaire, mais également j'ai échangé par le biais du sport de très haut niveau sur comment dire, cet événement que sont les Jeux olympiques.
D'accord, d'accord. Oui, je crois que les athlètes, nous sommes toujours connectés avec les sportifs. Comme ça, oui. D'accord, merci, professeur. Donc, maintenant, on va parler avec le Gender Equity in Europe, current situation and future perspective. Based on your experience in the European context, how do you perceive the current situation of gender equity in Olympic sport?
Alors, c'est une très, très bonne question parce qu'aujourd'hui, notamment au sein du système olympique international, il y a une volonté d'avoir cette égalité parfaite entre les hommes et les femmes. À Paris 2024, c'est la première fois qu'il y a cette égalité. Mais attention, attention, pas uniquement égalité des athlètes, mais égalité chez les juges, égalité chez les arbitres et également au CIO, une volonté d'avoir une égalité également dans les personnes qui font partie des commissions. Parce que vous le savez sans doute, au CIO, il y a les membres du CIO et il y a des commissions. Il y a une trentaine de commissions. Par exemple, moi, je suis dans la commission éducation olympique. Et dans cette commission, il y a toujours cette nécessité d'avoir l'égalité entre les femmes et les hommes. Alors, je serais tenté de dire que les Jeux de Paris 2024 ont voulu instituer cette égalité entre les hommes et les femmes. Et cette égalité, aujourd'hui, c'est quelque chose de très important en Europe. En Europe, la femme, l'homme doivent être à égalité. Mais ça n'empêche qu'il y a toujours une inégalité entre les salaires et les postes à responsabilité. On le voit aujourd'hui. Alors, il y a un petit bémol, c'est que vous le savez sans doute, depuis le mois de mars 2025, il y a maintenant à la tête du CIO, du Comité international olympique, une femme africaine, Christy Coventry, qui est une grande athlète, qui a gagné 7 médailles aux Jeux olympiques, dont des médailles d'or, qui a fait 5 Jeux olympiques, ministre des Sports, et qui vient du Zimbabwe. Et cette femme, aujourd'hui, eh bien, montre en quelque sorte eh bien, un nouveau visage de cette égalité.
Parfait. Oui, c'est raison. Et pourquoi à Paris 2024, ça a commencé très fort? Pourquoi pas avant?
Alors, en fait, c'est une très bonne question. C'est que les Jeux de Paris 2024 ont été les premiers Jeux à s'inscrire, à être organisés dans une nouvelle feuille stratégique, politique du système olympique international. Cette feuille diplomatique, cette feuille stratégique s'appelle l'agenda 2020. L'agenda 2020, l'agenda 2020, a été un élément, un cahier des charges, un élément très important pour expliquer que maintenant les Jeux, que maintenant l'organisation du mouvement olympique international, les fédérations internationales doivent promouvoir cette égalité. Et les premiers Jeux à devoir respecter ce cahier des charges a été Paris 2024.
D'accord, merci. Donc, avec le nouveau président de IOC, vous pensez qu'il va changer ou améliorer les années prochaines l'égalité?
Oui. Alors, c'est très compliqué de répondre à cette question parce que, comme vous le savez, nous sommes en mai 2025 et la nouvelle présidente va rentrer en fonction à partir du 23 juin 2025. Donc, en fait, tout cela est encore un peu prématuré pour comprendre si des choses vont changer ou pas. En tout cas, c'est un vrai signal. C'est un signal que
Tout à fait.
cette égalité, elle est de plus en plus, recherchée et que la femme devienne au poste habituellement réservé aux hommes. Donc en fait, c'est un vrai message. C'est un message et le plus fort, je crois, parce que comme vous le savez, l'olympisme et comment dire, s'organise à travers sept principes universels de non-discrimination, des principes éthiques, des principes de respect, mais surtout, surtout, surtout des non-discriminations en fonction du sexe, en fonction de la race, en fonction de la religion, en fonction de la politique, en fonction de la richesse. Donc en fait, ce respect notamment de l'égalité homme-femme est totalement en phase avec les principes diffusés par le système olympique international.
Mhm. Oui, c'est un travail très fort. Donc, what do you think have been the most significant advances in recent years?
Alors, les éléments significatifs qui peuvent être les plus symboliques, hein, notamment dans le
Oui,
cas de Paris 2024, hein,
oui,
euh, bah, je crois que ça a été, il me semble, l'allumage de la vasque olympique avec un homme et une femme. Et je crois que
right.
cette parité a été quelque chose de primordial pour montrer eh bien, que euh, cette égalité, eh bien, elle doit être portée au plus haut niveau et l'allumage de la flamme a été un moment très important parce que, comme vous le savez, en cumulé, nous avons à peu près 4 milliards de personnes qui regardent les Jeux. Donc, je crois le moment le plus symbolique a été incontestablement l'allumage de la vasque olympique aux Tuileries à Paris, notamment en binôme avec un homme et une femme.
D'accord, oui, je suis totalement d'accord avec ça. Et, ouais, maintenant, on va parler avec Paris 2024 Olympic Games and the symbolic experience. Paris 2024 was a milestone in terms of gender equality. From your perspective, what was the most symbolic or representative moment for women during these games?
Alors, les moments les plus symboliques, c'est ça, ou représentatifs pour les femmes.
Mhm, exactement.
Ouais, voilà. Alors, je crois que, comme je le disais, c'était cette égalité parfaite hein, chez les juges, chez les arbitres, chez les femmes, hein, chez les athlètes. Ça a été quelque chose de très, très fort. Ce qui a été aussi, à mon sens, très intéressant, c'est comment dire, euh, cette volonté de ne pas forcément promouvoir, euh, comment dire, je dirais, peut-être davantage tel ou tel athlète, où il y a eu vraiment cette volonté d'avoir cette promotion parfaite entre hommes et femmes. Et c'est ça, je pense, qui est très important. Cette volonté de ne pas privilégier peut-être un homme ou une femme, mais de montrer les jeux dans leur globalité. Voilà.
Mhm.
Elle est un peu difficile, hein, cette question. Hein.
Oui, oui, je crois aussi la promotion de las fédérations pour augmenter la quantité de femmes dans le sport. Parce
Mm,
que tout le temps, les hommes participaient tout le temps, mais les femmes, certainement, on participe, mais non tout le temps, mais maintenant la fédération encourage pour
mm,
participer beaucoup, et beaucoup tout le temps, je crois. Cette
mm,
4 années, c'est OK. We
mm,
have more males playing, but now we need more women in
mm,
action.
mm,
So
mm.
since childhood, they prepare now girls, women in order to participate in the future because we have more opportunities now,
Mm.
right? I
Puis
think.
il y a quelque chose qui est important en vous écoutant, Suzanne. Il y a quelque chose qui est très important. Moi, je me suis amusé à regarder les délégations. Les délégations, et je me suis aperçu que la plus grosse délégation, c'est les Américains. Et ça fait deux fois que les Américains, non, trois fois, excusez-moi, trois fois que les Américains, ils ont beaucoup plus de femmes que d'hommes dans la délégation américaine,
Ah,
beaucoup plus. Et ça, c'est assez impressionnant. C'est-à-dire que ça fait 3 fois que les femmes sont plus représentées que les hommes dans la délégation. Voilà.
ok.
Et
Ah,
ça, c'est un vrai tournant. C'est un tournant. Plus d'hommes, enfin plus de femmes que d'hommes.
ah,
Ça, c'est vraiment
oui.
très, très intéressant.
Oui, oui, je ne savais pas ça. C'est très important parce que c'est un pays qui, qui commence
Oui,
pour faire ça, et, mais je crois que maintenant, autres pays vont commencer de, par l'exemple des États-Unis. Oui.
voilà, voilà. Et là, j'y pense à l'instant, mais j'ai un document justement où j'ai ces chiffres-là. Ah maintenant, c'est pas mon document, mince,
Mhm,
que j'aurais
mhm.
voulu vous montrer. C'est assez impressionnant, c'est-à-dire que les Américains, eh bien, voilà, c'est je l'ai, je crois. Voilà, les Américains, excusez-moi.
C'est un document que vous écrivez ou un document de...
C'est un,
Ah,
c'est un document parce que j'étais aux États-Unis. J'étais aux
d'accord,
États-Unis
d'accord,
il y a quelques semaines, j'étais en Louisiane. Et donc, en fait, j'ai repris des éléments, notamment sur l'équipe américaine. Voilà, je vais vous montrer. Je vais vous montrer que je vais partager
d'accord,
mon écran. Voilà,
d'accord. Merci.
je partage mon écran.
Oui, oui, maintenant c'est bon. Mhm.
Voilà, regardez, c'est assez intéressant. Je vais le mettre en grand, hein. Voilà, c'est bon, vous l'avez là?
Oui, oui,
Voilà,
oui, oui,
regardez.
c'est bien.
Regardez, là, on a hommes, ça c'est les Américains, hein. Depuis 1896, on allait à Paris, on avait 318 femmes et l'équipe
Oui.
américaine, hommes,
Mhm.
283. Et regardez, même on a en 2016 à Rio, on avait beaucoup plus de femmes que d'hommes.
Oui, oui,
Regardez, notamment à Londres, on avait beaucoup plus de femmes que d'hommes. Et
d'accord,
en fait, il y a un tournant chez les Américains depuis 2012 et on le voit aussi, on le voit pas du tout dans les sports d'hiver, on le voit dans les sports d'été, dans les Jeux olympiques d'été. Depuis 2012, il y a plus de femmes que d'hommes dans le système, dans les sélections américaines.
c'est impressive. Vous
Voilà, et vous
êtes,
voyez,
oui, mhm,
à Paris, vous voyez, 318 femmes. Donc, beaucoup plus, évidemment, hein, beaucoup plus, hein, donc à peu près quoi, 53-54% de femmes et 46-47% d'hommes.
d'accord. Savez-vous pourquoi il y a plus de femmes que d'hommes? Et c'est un
Non,
sujet
non,
d'équalité ou
j'ai
juste...
pas. Alors, simplement, ce qu'on peut dire, Suzanne, ce qu'on peut dire, vous l'avez sous les yeux avec le graphique du haut que j'ai fait là. Parce que j'ai pris tous les chiffres depuis 1896. Donc, ça a été un travail gigantesque. Mais on voit par exemple que les Américains, hein, vous le voyez, regardez, aquatics, athletics, rowing, skiing. Et donc, en fait, on s'aperçoit que les Américains, ils sont principalement dans ces 4 sports. Ils vont dans 4 sports, les Américains. Ils vont dans la
D'accord,
natation, l'athlétisme, ils vont dans l'aviron. Et en fait, on peut imaginer qu'effectivement, qu'en athlétisme et en natation, il y ait il y a beaucoup d'épreuves, il y a à peu près 50 épreuves, hein, Suzanne, 50 épreuves en athlétisme et en athlétisme, c'est 50 épreuves en natation. Donc on peut imaginer largement que euh, le niveau américain est peut-être encore largement supérieur chez les femmes, et ce qui leur permet d'avoir une meilleure qualification. On peut l'imaginer comme ça.
exactement. Et j'attends pour les prochains Jeux olympiques à Los Angeles. Comment on
Hein.
va faire? Parce que maintenant, c'est le même, c'est plus pour les femmes. Je crois que pour les prochaines Jeux olympiques, c'est totalement probablement plus de femmes, probablement.
Sans doute, sans doute. Et regardez, là, je vous ai mis là pour Paris 2024, c'est un travail que j'ai fait. Regardez les médailles américaines. C'est intéressant, ça. Les médailles américaines, c'est principalement dans 3 sports à Paris. Natation, athlétisme, gymnastique. Et gymnastique, on le sait très bien, c'est la fameuse équipe de gymnastique emmenée par Susan Bice. Donc, on le sait très bien. Donc en fait, euh, beaucoup plus de femmes, parce que je pense que les femmes sont davantage performantes que les hommes américains. Voilà.
C'est vrai,
Voilà,
c'est vrai.
voilà,
Mhm.
je voulais vous montrer ce graphique hein, sur lequel voilà,
D'accord.
j'ai pas mal travaillé hein, et on le voit après, notamment encore avec ce graphique-là, hein, avec les médailles que j'ai fait. Hein, voilà,
Oh, oui,
j'ai montré ça aux États-Unis, hein, notamment il y a quelques jours en Louisiane, hein, où j'étais. Voilà.
d'accord. C'est
Voilà,
impressif.
et on voit très très bien les médailles, hein, on le voit très bien. Hein. Athlétisme, gymnastique, natation.
Ah, oui,
Voilà.
c'est vrai. C'est pas juste des équipes collectives, c'est pas aussi équipe individuelle, oui, ou
Mais en
sport
fait,
individuel.
ce qu'il faut bien bien comprendre, c'est que le système mondial aujourd'hui fait des choix, fait des choix. Alors donc je suis désolé, mais je n'ai pas regardé pour le Pérou, mais je pourrais le faire. C'est-à-dire que pour le Pérou, moi je serais, c'est facile, hein, je vais à Lausanne, je vais au CIO et je serai en capacité de vous dire vos équipes où elles sont les meilleures. Je peux vous le dire ça. Voilà. Et là, moi j'ai fait un travail sur les États-Unis parce que j'étais aux États-Unis, mais en fait, ce qu'il faut comprendre, c'est que chaque pays fait un choix sportif.
Oui.
Les Américains ont fait le choix de 3 sports. Les Français ont fait un choix différent. Les Anglais font un choix encore différent. Les Américains, les Allemands, etc., etc. Donc en fait, euh, il y a une politique nationale qui est faite. Et cette politique nationale, et c'est ça qui est important, elle est faite uniquement en fonction des médailles qu'on peut gagner. Et là, les Américains se sont rendus compte que les médailles, c'est grâce aux femmes surtout. C'est ça qui
D'accord.
est, c'est
Wow.
ça qui est important. Et donc, en fait,
Intéressant.
c'est
Mhm.
pour ça que les sélections américaines, hein, je reviens en arrière, les sélections américaines, eh bien, on va prendre 318 femmes et peu d'hommes. Voilà.
Oui, voilà.
Et regardez, depuis 1896, regardez au milieu. Au milieu, au
Mhm.
milieu, je suis en capacité de vous dire qu'il y a, depuis 1896, 13 775 Américains qui ont fait les Jeux. Et regardez le chiffre. Eh bien,
Mhm. Et-
aujourd'hui, ce chiffre, il va s'inverser. Il s'inverse, ça y est, ça
Oui,
s'inverse. Voilà.
d'accord. Wow. Ouais. Euh,
Voilà, je vais arrêter.
C'était une information très importante. Merci pour partager. Donc, on continue. As a French citizen and an expert in Olympism, how did you experience this edition of the games from a gender equity point of view?
Alors, donc en fait, attendez, parce que j'étais en train de remettre là. Donc en fait, vous voulez savoir un petit peu quel est, en tant que citoyen français,
Oui,
euh, un petit peu comment j'ai vécu cette édition des Jeux. C'est ça, c'est ça.
exactement.
Voilà. Alors, en fait, ce qu'il faut comprendre, c'est que, comme je vous le disais, ces Jeux, ils sont assez, ils sont nouveaux. En fait, ce qu'il faut comprendre, c'est que ces jeux rentrent dans une ère nouvelle. Dans une ère nouvelle où, globalement, avant, nous étions dans une ère politique, nous étions dans une ère économique, nous étions dans une ère euh, euh, basée sur des relations bilatérales. Aujourd'hui, nous sommes dans une mondialisation où cette nouvelle ère donne la priorité non plus, je dirais, à une ère politique ou économique, mais une ère de vivre ensemble, d'écologie, de respect de la planète, du respect des personnes. Et en fait, cette nouvelle ère prend en compte eh bien, l'individu dans sa totalité. Et l'homme et la femme sont perçus comme comment dire, dans cette ère, comme quelque chose d'essentiel, d'essentiel. Donc en fait, ces jeux, pour moi, ont été un élément très important parce que ils ont mis, nous sommes rentrés dans une ère nouvelle. Nous sommes dans une ère nouvelle où cette ère nouvelle, c'est vraiment comment dire, cette volonté de non-discrimination en fonction du
Mhm.
sexe, en fonction de la race,
D'accord.
de la religion, etc., etc. Voilà.
Mhm, mhm. À partir de Paris 2024, pensez-vous que cela a influencé les clubs de tous les sports et toutes les divisions à Paris, à France, en France?
Sincèrement, là, vous êtes en train de parler de
Mhm.
l'héritage. Parler de l'héritage. Sincèrement, je nuancerais, je minimiserais, je mettrais un petit bémol parce que je ne suis pas sûr que les retombées, que l'héritage, le legacy soit aussi important qu'on l'aurait imaginé. Ces jeux ont été une vitrine incroyable avec une parité, avec une inclusion des personnes handicapées, un respect des sexes. Et on s'aperçoit qu'aujourd'hui, je crois que tout ça n'a pas forcément des retombées totalement voulues. Euh,
D'accord,
je, je nuancerai un peu tout ça. Voilà. Donc, je crois qu'il y a
d'accord,
encore un vrai travail. Il y a un vrai travail à mener sur, comment dire, sur cet héritage. Et je crois que malheureusement, euh, cet héritage a été repris par les politiques et les
d'accord.
politiques n'ont pas donné l'élan, la dynamique suffisante.
D'accord. Merci, merci, Dr. Eric. Ouais, maintenant, on va parler about your recent research in the Olympic education and youth.
Ouais.
Since you are working currently on a book about the role models in sports working with youth people, what is the main focus of this publication?
Alors, en fait, cette publication, elle est très importante parce que j'essaie d'expliquer que donc ce livre qui va sortir dans quelques jours, il va s'appeler Bilan et perspectives de Paris 2024. J'ai
Ah,
sorti,
d'accord,
j'ai sorti il y a quelques jours, non, il y a 2 ans, pardon, il y a 2 ans, cet ouvrage sur la genèse et les principes. Vous le voyez, Suzanne? Vous
d'accord.
voyez?
Oui,
Voilà.
oui, oui, je
Et
le revois. Mhm.
voilà. Et donc, en fait, là, je vais sortir dans quelques jours un nouvel ouvrage, Bilan et perspectives Paris 2024, et essayer d'expliquer que cette éducation olympique, elle est essentielle parce que les Jeux, l'olympisme est un moyen de faciliter les apprentissages, de faciliter le vivre ensemble, de faciliter le combat contre les discriminations raciales, sociales, politiques, sexuelles, etc., etc. Et donc, en fait, l'éducation olympique est quelque chose, moi, qui est très important parce que l'olympisme, tout le monde sait de quoi il s'agit. Tout le monde sait. Et en fait, à Paris 2024, il y a eu, pour les Jeux, 111 professions, 111 personnes de professions différentes qui ont travaillé. Des architectes, des coachs, des urbanistes, des personnes sur l'écologie, des personnes sur rendre la Seine, le fleuve propre, etc., etc. Donc en fait, l'olympisme est un moyen d'unir, est un moyen de rassembler. Et donc en fait, moi je crois que ce concept d'éducation olympique va permettre de faciliter les apprentissages, de faciliter la cohésion sociale, de faciliter le vivre ensemble. Et c'est pour ça que le prochain livre qui sort sur bilan et perspective Paris 2024 va reprendre cet élément fondamental, c'est que les jeux ne sont pas une finalité, mais les jeux sont un moyen de changer nos sociétés, de changer notre vision de la société. Et donc, en fait, il est très important de se saisir des jeux pour changer notre société. Et Paris 2024, le slogan, c'était le slogan, comment dire, une révolution sociétale. Vous voyez, je vais vous montrer
Ah,
quelque chose.
oui, oui, oui.
Ça, c'est la mascotte. C'était la mascotte. Et la mascotte, c'est un bonnet. C'est le bonnet
Mhm.
phrygien. Ce bonnet
Oui,
phrygien, c'est le bonnet. Je vais vous montrer quelque chose. Attendez,
oui,
je vais
oui,
vous
oui.
montrer quelque chose. Attendez, je reprends un peu mon écran. Attendez, je vais vous montrer quelque chose. Mince, il n'est pas là. Tac, 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 tac. Je vais vous montrer quelque chose. Il n'est pas là, il n'est pas là, il n'est pas là. Non, c'est pas là. En fait, ce qu'il faut bien comprendre, c'est que ces Jeux de Paris 2024 ont voulu créer une révolution. Alors, vous savez qu'en France, nous avons eu une révolution. Et cette révolution,
Exactement.
c'était avec le bonnet phrygien, ce bonnet-là.
Bien sûr.
Et,
Ah,
et ce bonnet, ah, ça y est, j'ai trouvé. J'ai trouvé ce que je vais vous montrer. Regardez,
ah, d'accord.
regardez.
Oh oui, c'est bon.
Voilà, super. Voilà,
Oh, la
regardez.
liberté. Oui,
Voilà, la liberté, le guidant le peuple. Et en France, nous avons un grand musée qui s'appelle le Louvre. Le Louvre. Et ce grand musée, nous
d'accord.
avons ce tableau. Et ce tableau, il est très connu dans le monde. Et regardez cette femme, elle porte
Oui,
un bonnet. Le voilà le
les
bonnet.
bonnettes. Oui. Mhm.
C'est le bonnet phrygien. Et en fait, lorsque cette femme qui s'appelle Marianne, que nous avons dans toutes les villes en France, cette Marianne-là, cette femme-là, qui a été peinte par le peintre Eugène Delacroix, eh bien, cette femme, c'est l'emblème de la Révolution. Et là, on a voulu que ces jeux, Suzanne, eh bien, cette frige montre
Oui,
qu'on veut une révolution, mais sociale, avec l'égalité de la femme, de l'homme, des personnes handicapées. Et donc, en fait, cette mascotte nous ramène à ce bonnet phrygien de la Révolution française.
d'accord. Ça, impressive. Je ne savais pas qu'elle est connectée avec la révolution, mais c'est
Si,
intéressant.
voilà,
Maintenant, c'est l'adolescence maintenant pour moi, mais maintenant pour toutes nos people who's watching us. Oh,
hein,
c'est incroyable de connaître ça.
voilà,
Merci beaucoup pour partager cette information. C'est importante.
voilà.
And
Non, mais c'est
also,
important parce que, en fait, le CIO, IOC, wanted to change the society, mais, la France, avec les Jeux, a voulu s'inspirer de la révolution, cette
exactement.
révolution sociétale, hommes, femmes, personnes handicapées. Et regardez, Suzanne, la torche olympique. Cette torche
Uh-huh.
olympique, attendez,
Aussi, uh-huh. Oui, oui, oui,
cette,
oui.
cette torche, vous voyez, je vais vous montrer quelque chose. Ça,
Oui,
c'est hyper intéressant. Ça, c'est super intéressant. Regardez,
pas maintenant. Oui, c'est bon maintenant. Mhm.
voilà, regardez. La torche olympique. Regardez la torche. La
Oui,
torche, habituellement, elles sont comme ça, les torches.
elle est différente. Mhm.
Voilà. Regardez celle de Paris. Regardez celle de Paris.
D'accord.
Eh
Mhm.
ben, celle de Paris, Suzanne, c'est deux cylindres identiques. Mais ces deux cylindres, c'est eh ben, l'égalité parfaite. C'est eh ben, homme-femme,
C'est vrai,
égalité parfaite. Et c'est ça qui
c'est
est
vrai.
important. C'est très important, c'est-à-dire qu'en fait, cette révolution, Elle a été
D'accord.
voulue partout. C'est la première fois qu'il y avait un binôme qui allumait la vasque olympique. Regardez, Suzanne. Regardez.
Mhm.
C'est bon,
D'accord.
vous voyez ou pas là?
Oui, oui, c'est bon. Mhm.
Voilà.
On part.
Regardez en 1924, il y a 100 ans, regardez, il y a
D'accord,
100
oui.
ans, le journal Le Petit Écho de la mode en France, aux Jeux Olympiques, la femme, elle devait avoir un costume
Mhm.
tailleur. Regardez, la
Oui.
femme, on l'habillait pour aller au stade. Regardez, la femme, elle avait une coiffure olympique. En fait, la femme, il y a 100 ans en France, on la voyait comme une femme objet. C'était une femme objet.
Exactement.
Aujourd'hui,
Mhm.
cette révolution, c'est non, on veut une égalité parfaite. Regardez la femme, regardez la femme. La femme, on l'habillait pour aller au stade. Regardez, pour aller aux Jeux Olympiques 1924.
Yeah.
Regardez,
Wow.
la femme, Olympiade 1924, il y a 100 ans. Regardez, Jean Patou. Jean Patou, regardez, il habille la femme et on
Mhm.
habille la femme aussi pour jouer, pour jouer, pour jouer.
Pour jouer, ouf.
Voilà. Et la femme, regardez, on va même imaginer, regardez, on va même imaginer, eh bien, comment dire, des éventails pour se faire du vent. Et on va mettre en valeur un petit peu cette femme sportive. Et donc, en fait, ce qu'il faut comprendre,
Magnifique.
ce qu'il faut comprendre, c'est qu'on a une évolution. Et cette évolution,
Mm.
c'est ça qui caractérise, c'est cette révolution.
Exactement.
Voilà.
Magnifique, magnifique. Tout que vous faites a un sens, oui, mais
Oui, oui.
les flammes, les mascottes, tout a sens. C'est magnifique. Le
Oui.
standard is high, Magno, for the
Oui.
next Olympic. Bremont. Oui. Merci pour partager des informations. C'est très important. Je crois que eh, we wouldn't know that if you wouldn't share this information. Thank you so much for this. Okay, so let's continue. From your perspective as a historian, how would you describe the evolution of women in Olympism? Well, you already mentioned so far. What key stages do you identify, and what do you mean to you? Maybe you can
Mhm.
answer the last two questions.
Ok, ok. Euh, Moi, je crois qu'il y a un signe fort. Nous en avons déjà parlé. Ce signe fort, c'est l'élection de Christy Coventry à la présidence de IOC. Moi, je pense que c'est très important. C'est immensément important. Ça veut dire que le regard des personnes, des hommes, change actuellement. C'est-à-dire que ce regard, les Jeux de Paris 2024 ont été les premiers Jeux égalitaires. Moi, ce que je pense, c'est que il y a eu un grand pas de réaliser, notamment en une dizaine d'années. En une dizaine d'années, les choses sont considérablement avancées. Et regardez, par exemple, même la cérémonie d'ouverture, Opening Ceremonies in Paris, eh bien,
Mhm.
la cérémonie d'ouverture a été une cérémonie révolutionnaire. Cette
Exactement.
cérémonie, il y a eu plein de choses inimaginables. Et je crois que, de mon point de vue, l'évolution de la place de la femme dans la société, eh bien, je crois que, sincèrement, je crois qu'aujourd'hui, cet élan qui a été donné par Paris 2024, par la France, eh bien, doit se poursuivre, notamment à travers les Jeux olympiques de Milan Cortina d'Ampezzo en 2026, à Los Angeles, à LA 2028, pour tout simplement que comment dire, ces éléments puissent tout simplement être pris en compte de manière durable. Donc je crois que, allez, on va avoir Milan 2026 pour les Jeux Olympiques d'hiver, Los Angeles 2028. Et on va avoir aussi quelque chose de très important, et à mon avis qu'il ne faut surtout pas négliger. Ce sont les Jeux Olympiques de la jeunesse qui vont avoir lieu à Dakar l'année prochaine. Et à Dakar, les Jeux Olympiques de la jeunesse sont un moyen d'expérimenter, sont un moyen d'analyser l'évolution
D'accord.
de la société. Et je crois que 2026, Jeux Olympiques d'hiver, Dakar 2026, comment dire, Los Angeles vont être des étapes clés, notamment pour poursuivre cette égalité entre les hommes et les femmes.
D'accord, d'accord. Merci, merci. Donc, to conclude, what message would you like to share with the students, sport managers, and academic joining us today about the role of women in Olympism and the path toward equity?
Alors, je crois qu'il est fondamental qu'il y ait des cours, des enseignements à l'université. Je crois fondamental qu'il y ait des séminaires, qu'il y ait des masterclass dans les universités pour montrer peut-être des événements, peut-être des moments clés dans tel ou tel pays, dans telle ou telle capitale, dans telle ou telle ville, qui viennent expliquer les bonnes pratiques. Et je crois que moi, mon job à l'université, c'est d'organiser des masterclass qui permettent de montrer les bonnes pratiques et surtout les étapes franchies qui nous permettent simplement d'aller encore plus loin dans cette égalité homme-femme. Donc je crois, moi, qu'il est essentiel de travailler conjointement, qu'il est essentiel d'échanger, d'envisager des échanges, de partenariats, de diffuser les bonnes pratiques aux étudiants à travers des masterclass. Et comme je le disais à Paloma, moi j'aimerais beaucoup envisager peut-être des échanges entre la France et le Pérou, entre votre université et mon université. Voilà.
Merci beaucoup. You're right. I think we need to work right away because this is something that it's working outside of us, but in several countries we don't even talk about it, and I think it's important to start teaching our young athletes. Thank you, doctor, for this information. Well, on fini, we finish. Merci, Professor Eric, pour cette conversation très valable. Pour votre enthousiasme, pour votre énergie et pour votre information. Je crois que vous nous avez offert une perspective profonde et significative sur le rôle des femmes, Paris 2024, et l'Olympisme. Beaucoup d'informations. Nous espérons que votre travail continue à inspirer les nouvelles générations et renforcer l'éducation olympique sur les langues de l'équité. Thank you very much, Professor Eric, for such an enriching conversation. You have offered us a deep and meaningful perspective on the role of women in Olympism, the progress that has been made, and also the challenges that lie ahead. We hope that we can find your book soon. Let us know where we can buy it or get access. I think it's important for us to have such of this information in our university as well. To our audience, we invite you to stay connected with the Women and Sports Summit 2025, where we continue exploring the path towards a fairer and more inclusive sporting world. Thank you for being with us. Thank you, everybody.
A very big thank you to Eric and Susan for that meaningful exchange. Now we travel to Oceania for our next interview. From Australia, we welcome Dr. Adele Pavlidis, Associate Professor at Griffith University, who speaks with Dr. Taylor McKee, Professor at Brock University, about gender and power in sport. This interview highlights how sociology can challenge existing structures and open new paths for equity in coaching, leadership, and athlete governance.
We are joined today by a distinguished Australian researcher whose work has had a significant impact on the study of gender relations in sport. Dr. Adele Pavlidis is an associate professor of sociology at Griffith University. She is a former DECRA fellow and the author of numerous publications on sport, gender, power, and mental health from a feminist perspective. Her recent research focuses on gender equity in high-performance sport and mixed gender disciplines. Adele combines theoretical insight with social practice, and today she will share key findings from her studies on coaches, mixed gender sports, and her reflections on pay equity and cultural changes regarding women in sport. Welcome, Adele.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome. I'm excited to speak with you today.
Fantastic. Adele, thank you so much for being with us. To begin, what motivated you to study sport from a gender and power perspective?
That's a very good question. I think broadly, I had a concern about the ways that we think about things like health and well-being, so that they were in a clinical arena, whereas things like leisure and sport were thought of outside of that area. So I was really curious and interested to think about those things together. I was also interested and curious about the ways that we position elite athletes as kind of heroes and role models, despite all the challenges that we know happens in elite sport, as well as the pressures on elite athletes. And I'm also interested in the ways that sport, like other male-dominated fields, marginalize women. So for me, sport is an amazing exemplar or like way to look at society and where we're at with different things. So for me, it wasn't that I had an instrumental goal, perhaps of, supporting people to win more gold medals. My concern was definitely about power relations, change as well, and hence I'm really interested when we see these mega trends in sport, the shift away from organized sport to informal sport or individualized sport, or the rise of gym and fitness. All of these things are part of what interested me to bring this feminist theory, feminist lens to the field of sport as a rich cultural arena.
Well, that's fantastic. And your academic journey includes topics like mental health, community work, and social transformation. How do you integrate these dimensions into your current research?
It's a real mix, and I think that one of the things that I talk about is that my focus is not on finding some kind of totalizing solution or simple answer. So I'm not looking for a theory that's going to explain everything. Instead, my goal is to really carefully think through and unravel the entanglements in sport. So you've got things like parents in sport, volunteers, parent coaches, the bullying that happens, the politics of selection, sexism, homophobia, even things like diplomacy on the international stage, economics, disability, the entanglement of all of these social forces and social identities, and just really starting to tease through and reveal some of these inequities. Because a lot of the times, some things that happen in sport are just thought of as natural. That's just how they are. But when we start to question them, it's like, well, they don't have to be. We know that from the rise of women in sport, and we're seeing professionalism of women in sport. That's just an example of how it was based on assumptions of what women's bodies could do, of what audiences wanted, when actually that wasn't the reality. So for me, thinking about all these areas together are really important in really showcasing and highlighting that sport is a powerful arena for social change. Things like mental health, for example, in a lot of ways, in Australia, we talk about sport is good for your mental health. Yet on the very same kind of coin, we talk about all the mental health challenges that athletes face. And athletes are coming out and talking about their own mental health more and more here. So I guess holding that idea in tension that something can be both good for your mental health and bad for your mental health. And I'm so curious, like, what is that? What is the difference? What is it that makes something good or bad? And it is about that relational aspect and the minutia, the nuance, the complexity. It's not just this is good for you, because we know that's not true. You can have an injury, you can be bullied, the pressures can get too much. There's so many things there that really require a more complex and critical theoretical approach.
I think that leads nicely into discussion of coaching, which I think hits on a lot of what you just brought up there. You've investigated the differences in the experiences of male and female coaches in elite sport. What are the main findings regarding how female coaches are perceived?
So that research was talking to strength and conditioning coaches, so level 3, which is the highest level that you can get in Australia. So these were coaches who were working with elite athletes in individual and team sports. And we wanted to understand how they understood gender difference. For people who were trained in sports science, usually, and practical experience, we knew that there was very little education about sex and gender difference, particularly gender. So as a sociologist, of course, I would argue that gender is just as, if not more important than sex. However, the understandings of these coaches of the idea of a social conception of gender was very limited. Yet when we spoke to them, they definitely understood that there were some things that couldn't be explained simply by sex. So these were sometimes uncomfortable conversations because in their mind, they had very fixed ideas about sex. But when we started to open up a conversation, they could acknowledge that there were definitely some things that were more about the social dimension of gender. So in terms of the differences that they perceived, so these are not actual differences. I just wanted to clarify that. These are around how the coaches perceive difference. And they perceive difference in 3 main areas. My colleagues and I kind of clustered them around. So there was the physical differences. So there was a lot of discussion around, for example, women athletes could handle more pain, for example. Women athletes had stronger lower bodies, weaker upper bodies. So there was this broad understanding that wasn't tested. A lot of it was just assumptions. Then there was the emotional dimension. So there was some really interesting talk about, from some of the male coaches, the men coaches, around the teams, the women teams, around them crying, for example, or being emotional. And they felt that changed the way they had to relate to them. And then there were differences around their coaching style. And this was completely unconclusive because some people said, oh, the women ask more questions. They want to know why they're doing something. They don't want to just be told, do this. They want to understand why. And some of the reasons given for that were that for women athletes, often there is, less financial incentive. Potentially, if they get injured, they're not going to have the same amount of care. We know from some current research that gender can affect women at all stages of their sporting lives. So, early stages, training, competition, but also treatment and recovery of injuries. So the women may have been more cautious, asking more questions. But then some coaches said that men asked more questions. So we can't really say conclusively that that's true or not. It's just that there was a perception that there was a difference. And this is the thing. In Australia, we've only had one woman Prime Minister, Julia Gillard. And in her autobiography, she writes that her gender was it wasn't everything, but it was something. And I think that's a really good way to think about gender in sport, that it's not everything, but it's definitely something. And these coaches who work closely with women, both these were men coaches and women coaches, they also understood that it was something, but it was very hard to articulate what that something was. The women coaches that we talked to, because they had their own embodied experience, so they knew what it was like for them to be coached. Then they knew what it was like to be a woman coach. So one of the coaches we spoke to talked about traveling with a senior man coach in her field and being expected to share a hotel room with him. So there wasn't any kind of thought for her privacy or safety in that context. So this particular coach, she was a really good example because she thought that gender had nothing to do with it. She was like, I'm a coach, I coach men because at that time that's who the elite athletes were. And slowly over time, she kind of had this, I guess, feminist revelation. And that's something that my colleagues and I have written about in other contexts as well for women in sport management. So some women who think that gender's got nothing to do with it, but then slowly these things happen and they start to realize, hang on a second, this is because of my gender that I've been treated this way. Or, for example, women coaches being told, well, women should coach women. And questioning that with an openness, like, yes, there are benefits, but women can also coach men. It doesn't mean that they have to just stick to that because men would be coaching women and men. So yeah, just opening up the complexity of all of that. I think it's a really interesting area. Coaches in elite sport can be under a lot of pressure to have a result. So thinking about their own mental health and well-being, how do they stay, I guess, self-regulated to work with the athletes in front of them without kind of pushing, I think is important. So yeah, we had two publications around this data. One is around the broader gender differences perceived, and one is around the process of having these uncomfortable conversations about gender difference. So that was a really important piece to open up the conversation, particularly with non-binary and trans athletes. How do we have these difficult conversations with coaches who usually have had no education or engagement around the social aspects of gender in society? So, they've been interested in sports science, and sports science is not always as advanced in terms of its biology as pure, like, biological science. When I talk to my colleagues in biology, they understand completely about gender differences, about sex variations and all these things. But in sports science, they do rely on a much more fixed conception of sex. So there's, we have a long way to go, but I think just, opening up these conversations, trying not to blame people for their lack of understanding as well, knowing that, for example, coaches, they're experts in their area. So, we need to be able to allow them to make mistakes. They don't have to be correct in their understanding to begin with. We want to support people to have these conversations and move along a journey to say that our understandings of sex and gender do change throughout history. There's a whole field of the history of sex and sexuality, for example, which we don't have to go into here, but we know that sex has changed throughout time. So yeah, that is such an important field. I think coaches are such influential players in elite sport, and to continue to focus on them.
Right, and what a wonderfully complex view of your findings there. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's incredibly fascinating, incredibly worthwhile for many areas of study in terms of, and made parts of the academic journey, even for people who have an interest in any sport. So returning to that discussion of barriers and the barriers that exist for coaches, what structural or cultural barriers still persist for women aspiring to lead high-performance teams?
There are, I think, a lot of barriers for women to, especially as lead coaches in high-performance teams. One that immediately comes to mind is around the travel required. So it does mean that some women will need to make a choice about whether they want to have children or not. and whether children can be taken on to travel with them and things like that. That's one of those very practical barriers that can be resolved in lots of different creative ways by having, maybe co-lead coaches so that the travel time isn't as much, by enabling people to bring their children when they travel. I remember for the 2018 Commonwealth Games, there was a bit of a controversy in that one of the athletes was breastfeeding a baby, and the baby wasn't allowed in the athlete's village. So that woman was therefore not allowed in the athlete's village, and her whole team decided they didn't want this one athlete not staying with them, so they all stayed outside the athlete village. But when you think about it, these things, surely we can move on from there and work with that, which I believe that things are changing. But for the coach who is in this leadership role, for a long time, it's just meant that women couldn't really consider that unless they didn't have children or delayed children, for example. So that's just one area. Other areas are around, just ongoing conceptions of women leadership and women leaders. We know that from lots and lots of literature in lots of different areas, women get a much harder time when they're leaders. If they, for example, don't get the outcomes that are required, they'll probably get, more discipline, more criticism. Just open up the comments on social media when it comes to issues around gender, and you'll already see, a lot of online abuse for women in leadership, women in sport who are out there. The issue of abuse and online hate is very real. So, sometimes the question is, well, why would you bother when you have to put up with all of that? So, yeah, I think there are both practical and then more cultural changes that need to happen to support high performance coaches in sport.
Absolutely. What social and emotional dynamics emerge in these settings?
I'm, very excited about thinking more about mixed gender sports. So I have written a couple of papers on that in relation to roller derby, which was the focus of my PhD before I then looked at other sports. And roller derby is, a very rich cultural field to explore some of these ideas, because in its current reincarnation, it was led by women. But there are some leagues around the world which are co-ed or gender integrated. And I think that, there are a lot of complex dynamics at play. There are issues around women feeling safe. There are issues around the feeling like there is a sense of cohesion within a club. So some women want to play with men. Some people identify as non-binary and so want to be able to play in whichever team they are welcome in, which is really important. And then there is just the issue of logistics, sizes of teams, sizes of clubs. Do we have enough players to train? Do we have enough players to fill all of the divisions? Historically, boys and girls, men and women have played together in various different sports because of the practicalities of that, because different people are at different levels. You might have a girl who is just an amazing athlete and who wants that opportunity to really push herself. So just as an example, the Olympics has approximately 20 mixed gender sports, and the Paralympics has around 43 mixed gender sports. So it's happening. It's not something that is not happening. It's happening. So we do need to better understand how we can ensure that these experiences are equitable, that they are safe, and that they can do their part in potentially transforming what we think sport is. So one of the things that I often will talk about is how sport is actually one of the last places in society that we're separated out according to our sex and gender. At work, there's no spaces like that. Most schools these days are co-educational. Professions, there's no professions in which only women work or only men work these days. Construction, mining, nursing, all of these things that used to be very gendered are now certainly open to everybody. But sport is one area where we continue to separate out. Now, at times, there may be good reasons for that. At other times, it's just historically what we've done. It's not because potentially it has to happen that way. And so I want to kind of ask the question, are there times where we might be better off integrating genders? What can we learn from each other in these mixed gender environments? Particularly for young people, I think it's really important that we demonstrate to them that, boys, girls, all genders can work together harmoniously. We can learn from each other. We can be friends. We have this sexualization of culture where, even 9-year-olds, we're sexualizing little kids. Oh, do you have a boyfriend yet? Do you have a girlfriend yet? Making it difficult for these really integrated sport contexts. I tell this story when my youngest child was in the nursery, and maybe he was 1 year old, and I was picking him up, and another mother came in and was talking to the educator and was saying, talking about her sons and saying, oh, they're being a bit rough. Boys will be boys, While she was saying this, there were 2 little babies basically strangling each other, right? They were just doing what babies do, pulling at each other, scratching each other. It didn't matter what gender they were. They were girl babies, but it didn't matter. These things are not gendered at that age. And there's so much research that shows that the ways that we, the assumptions we have, the way we kind of judge and look at people, criticize girls will inhibit their performance. So just really starting to question that. I know there was research quite a while back that showed that girl babies would, be less physical when their parents or mothers were watching them, as opposed to just when the researchers were there. So that couldn't happen today. You probably couldn't take a baby away from their parent. But there has been evidence to show that there is influence in, our body language, the way we talk to our girls, all shapes that. I'm also really, really hopeful in terms of, what we see with the rise of kind of the right and the man influences on social media, that mixed gender sport can be a site for just kind of working through some of those tensions as well, around sexuality, around, masculinities as well as femininities. So, yeah, I think that we have mixed gender sports at the Olympics, the highest level, at the Paralympics, the highest level. We can start to do that better all the way through the sports system, I think.
Absolutely. And Dr. Pavlidis, just to go on what you just sort of left us off on, in Los Angeles 2028, the upcoming Olympics, there will be a greater presence of mixed gender disciplines. Do you think that this meaningfully contributes to gender equity?
I think on its own, simply just having more mixed gender events won't contribute to gender equality or gender equity. I think that there has to be a lot more around that. Thinking about the Paralympics, for example, I'm working with Dr. Georgia Munro-Cook and Professor Simone Fullagar at the moment. We've got an article going out soon for review. But that data showed us that even in established mixed gender sports in Paralympics, there was still sexism around, access to change rooms, training, the way people felt, how they felt they could speak up. So it's like I've said in the past, sport plus women doesn't equal good. It's not, things aren't going to change just by saying, oh, well, we have this event or we're doing this thing. There needs to be that cultural piece around it, education around coaches to really do this purposefully. But maybe with having these kind of conversations, you don't know who's listening. which is why I always say yes. And that maybe somebody listening will think, maybe we need to talk to our athletes and coaches in this particular mixed gender sport about how we might be able to make this something meaningful.
Right. And to focus in on one of the sports that you mentioned earlier, and sort of also applying this to this context of the Olympics, um, speaking specifically to roller derby, what lessons from this alternative sport do you think could be applied to the Olympic context?
I think that's an interesting question, because there was a real tension and continues to be in roller derby between, going down an elite pathway and keeping it as a more subcultural sport. So, some of the, so I'm hesitant to say that all sport should be aspiring to an elite level, that we do need more of a focus on participation. And in terms of elite pathways, I mean, roller derby just showed us how a new sport can emerge in the sport landscape, and not simply just say, okay, we're going to have this elite pathway, we're going to choose the governance structures that are given to us from outside. Roller derby's really insisted on internal governance and this idea of by the athlete, for the athlete. I won't say that it's without its problems in roller derby in particular, but I do think that the emphasis on athlete governance is something that elite sport needs to really listen to, particularly in the area of safeguarding, for example. We need voices of abuse survivors in this sport governance space. We need athletes who have experienced poor coaches or all of these things to be in the governance so that they can make decisions for other athletes to protect them and make sure that human rights are adhered to, as well as just, not discriminating, all of those things. So that aspect of roller derby, I think, is the strongest. As I said, power relations are part of that. There's no utopia where you've got roller derby. Certainly wasn't a utopia where you've got athlete governance and everything's fine. There's still, of course, internal factions, some people might call that. There's always politics at play, I think, especially in sport. But I also think that roller derby has really tried to work through that in different ways. Some leagues I spoke to tried to get everyone to vote on things. They had forums where they could really hear the voices of all their members before decisions were made. All of these things could be learnt from and moved into the space of elite sport or Olympics.
Fantastic. And again, to pose another big picture question to you, what are your thoughts on pay equity in sport today? Are we witnessing a structural shift or more of a symbolic change?
I mean, I think the changes have been significant. I don't think they're insignificant. I think there has been significant investment in women's sport, which is good to see. I mean, it has taken a long time, and then it's been quite quick in a way. So it's like nothing for so long, and then maybe like nominal payment, and then finally, in some cases, nothing like what men receive, but at least enough to have a living wage in some instances. So that is certainly improvement. What I do think as a sociologist that there are major problems in the ways that especially men's professional sport relies on gambling, alcohol funding in order to subsidize these exorbitant salaries. So, okay, what would men be getting paid if we didn't have gambling and alcohol sponsorship? I would be curious to ask. Maybe there is just, maybe that pays all need to be at a more moderate level rather than some of these exorbitant pays. And we know from, for example, in the USA with college athletes, the kind of exploitation that can occur. as well in gridiron football and things like that, the injuries that players experience. Here in Australia, we have AFL, Australian Rules Football, and there was no question about starting a new fledgling team, paying those men players very large salaries, even though they didn't have the sponsorship, they didn't have the membership, but it was considered that's just how much they get paid and an investment. Whereas for the women, it was like, oh, but you're not getting the audiences. So yeah, there was a real double standard there around the value. So my colleague Simone Fullagar and Wendy O'Brien and I, we've just published a new book called Feminist Futures in Sport, where we do really kind of grapple with some of these issues around pay equity and the future of sport. You know, one of the questions that I ask is, as a sport with high rates of brain injury and concussion, you know, what is the future of that? For how long will we allow this kind of workplace risk? Do we need to have this risk in our society just for entertainment? There are lots of other sports that we could play that don't have the same high level of risk when it comes to brain injuries. So we're seeing more and more suicides as well in Australia, and I'm sure in other parts of the world, from these collision sports. So I think it's worth opening up that question of what is it we're paying for, and is it worth it? Yeah.
Right, thank you, and I really do appreciate your candor and your flexibility in terms of topic throughout these questions. And I think to close here, what message would you share with students, sport managers, and professionals who are seeking to foster a more inclusive and equitable sports culture?
That's a really great question, and I'm excited to answer it. I mean, I do think that we can't have this separation between sport management, sport science, and then sport sociology and the critical aspects. People who are sport managers and sport scientists would benefit from engaging with sport sociology and cultural studies to learn about the context that they're working within. You know, it's not a bubble, it's not some neutral activity. The history of sport, you know, the sociology, even things around politics of place, the ways that governments have used sport as a tool for their own use. All of these things need to be part of the curriculum when it comes to sport science and sport management. But also, you know, that's what a good leader in sport needs to start to think about that broader role of sport in society. You know, it is seen as a social good. So, and sport organizations benefit from that. Yet at the same time, they don't engage with what that means, because sport isn't always good. You know, it is a site of sexism, racism, ableism, homophobia, transphobia, you know, all the list goes on. So I would really like to see people working in the sports system to take a little bit of time, you know, to think about the innovative and creative ways that sport has been thought about. You know, there's sport poetry, for example. My colleagues and I engaged with a group of people who were disengaged with sport, and we spent the day helping them to write poems about their relationship with sport. And some of that was quite harrowing. It was moving. It really got to the heart of what keeps some people out of sport and keeps them disengaged. So really trying to understand that just because in your bubble, sport is a certain thing, for other people, it's not the same. So that developing that sense of empathy through reading, writing, engaging with ideas that may not seem directly relevant, but they're always the best ideas to engage with. You know, we can't think, oh, everything needs to be something I can apply now. There has to be also the long-term learning as well as short-term. So I implore everybody to have a sense of being a lifelong learner, working in sport, even being an athlete, to be a lifelong learner and to engage in all types of learning related to sport.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pavlidis, for this clear and insightful interview. You've offered valuable perspectives on how mixed-gendered sports, female leadership, and cultural transformations are shaping a fairer future in sport. My name is Taylor McKee, and I'm from the Department of Sport Management at Brock University. I've been thrilled to have you join us here today. And to our audience who's watching this, we invite you to continue exploring these themes as a part of the Women in Sports Summit 2025.
Thank you so much to Adele and Taylor for shedding light on these urgent and often overlooked issues. Now we wrap up our journey here in South America with our final interview. Representing South America, we're joined by Tassiana Pinto, Manager of Women in Sport at the Brazilian Olympic Committee, in conversation with Juan Chong, Coordinator of the UPC Olympic Studies and Research Center.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another interesting talk in this Women and Sport Summit 2025, organized by the Sport Management and Business Faculty at the University of Applied Science in Peru. My name is Juan Chong, and I will be your host in this talk. We are joined today by a distinguished Brazilian sport manager and researcher whose work has had significant impact in the sport field. Let me introduce to Ms. Tassiana Pinto, who is a professional sport manager currently serving as the manager of the Women and Sport Initiative at the Brazilian Olympic Committee. She previously was the Sport Development Manager of the Brazilian Olympic Committee, contributing directly to the development of the young athletes and strengthening the sport development system within the Brazilian sport federations. She also worked at the Rio 2016 Olympic Games as the Judo Services Manager. Tassiana holds a degree in physical education and a master's in sport and Olympic studies from the University of Tsukuba in Japan. She also completed a postgraduate degree in project management. Through her career, she has been committed to promoting gender equality in sport, working to increase women participation at all levels and encouraging more women to engage with and excel in the sport world. Welcome, Tassi, in this seminar. Tassi, to begin this conversation, how do you perceive sport from a gender perspective in the world, and particularly in Brazil?
Hello, Juan. First of all, I want to thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to talk to you. So about your question, I think we still have lots to do considering women in sports and the whole sports system. I'm more in touch with the high performance system, and we have some challenges yet. We had a lot of progress in the last decades, but we still have a lot to do. So it's a challenging field. We are working a lot, but we see the progress is still very slow. So lots of things to do, and that's what I'm doing here in the Brazil Olympic Committee.
Yeah, thank you for that. Your work at the Brazilian Olympic Committee is very interesting, but what is your role and what are your main responsibilities in there?
Yeah, I'm the women sport manager. So we have this department inside the Brazil Olympic Committee, inside the sport directory. And we are in charge to promote better performance for women athletes, but also to work in the system promoting moral equity in sports. So we have these two challenges. One is to look to our athletes and how can we help them to get more performance. And the other one is to look to the whole system and what are the other things that we have to do so the young athletes can have a better environment to develop in sport, to have more women practicing sport, competing in high performance, more coaches, more managers, the whole system.
Excellent. And I know that there's a women and sport development program as well. That is part of the activities of the Women and Sport Initiative. What is all about and why do you think it's necessary?
Yeah, we have some programs within this department. One of them is the Women in Sport One of them is the Women in Sport Development Program. There is a program that we help the national federations, support the national federations to build their strategies to develop more women in sports. So we have a budget, resource that is allocated only for this, for women in sports. every year, each national federation can apply some projects, and we have this selection process, and then we help the national federations to implement these projects. So as an example, we have the Surf Federation, who has a program that they go through different beaches in Brazil, and Brazil is a very big country, and they go to these beaches and make some training camps to try to identify these young athletes. Then they make a selection process and bring them to the Brazil Olympic Committee training center, and they spend some time here making some sports tests, training, and they have this contact with the National Federation Technical Commission, and some of them can travel and compete outside Brazil. So it's the whole structure to identify these athletes and bring them to the high performance sports. We have other federations that focus on female coaches development. We have other federations that are thinking about referees and judges, how to develop this woman. So I think the main importance of this project is that we can help and we can support each federation within its strategy. Some of them, they don't have yet a strategy. So we sit together and try to understand, make a diagnosis, understand their environment, and then propose some projects to foster the woman developing in that sport. So I think it's the most important program we have, because we can work with different sports. This year we have 18 projects. We already invested more than 4 million reais in this project, so something like $800,000 in 3 years, more than 30 projects, and we are seeing the impact of this program in the national federations, which now they start to have a women's sport department as well. So we are not alone anymore. We have some people in charge of this within the national federation structure.
Excellent. You already talked about some numbers, but I would like to go a little bit deeper on that and tell us a little bit more on what has been the impact of your work over the time this program has been operating.
Yes, it's still difficult to measure, because we are doing this for 4 years, 5 years now. So this department began in 2021 after Tokyo Olympics. We have now more qualitative changes than quantitative changes, but we start to see some differences. That is hard to say that it's because of this department and because of this project, but I think it's the whole women in sport movement across the world. So if we want to talk about numbers, we can say that in the last Pan American Games in Santiago in 2023 was the first time that the Brazilian female athletes brought more medals than the male athletes. So in Paris last year, we have more athletes competing, more Brazilian female athletes competing than men. Our 3 gold medals were from women athletes. So we are seeing this movement. It's difficult to say that this is a reflex of these projects, but we are working in a broad system, doing different initiatives, and of course this will foster the whole movement of female athletes. So another number that is interesting, in Tokyo we had only 6% of female coaches. All the coaches we had, only 6% were women, and now in Paris we have 12%. So things are increasing, and I cannot say that it's only because of our projects, but I think we are contributing a lot for this kind of change.
Yeah, of course. I believe that research will be like the base to develop a better sports system around the world. And I think what you are doing is amazing. And you also talk about conducting studies and showing the results. But can you tell us about the barriers that women face in Brazilian sports system? Can you share some of these challenges that you have identified?
Yeah, we had a partnership with Unicamp, which is the University of Campinas in São Paulo, which has a department who is studying a lot women in sport, and we made this partnership. And we run a questionnaire with 300 high performance coaches. In this study, we used Lavoie and Deto references, and they organized these barriers in some layers, individual barriers, organizational barriers, interpersonal barriers, and we evaluated how the Brazilian coaches understand their career and what they are facing. So we had some good results, and for us it was important to have a South global information, because most of the references we have is from Europe or America, and we still have few information from Latin America. And we understood that for us, the intersectionality is very important. So the barriers that white women faces are different from the barriers of Black women or indigenous women, and the ones who have children have different barriers of others. So for us, it was very important to see this whole spectrum and different barriers that this woman face. I think we have two things. There are many barriers, such as lack of opportunities, such as a male dominant space environment where they cannot achieve these opportunities. But they also face, and they also talk a lot about this, that there are no support. So one thing, there are barriers, something that that don't let them arrive in these places and stay in this place. But they are also understand that they don't have support from the organizations, and the high performance sports is still closer to them, so I maybe can bring some of the barriers that we face there. For example, they say that the men only hire other men, and something that we see it happens a lot of times. So if we don't have women in the leadership positions, it's more difficult for these women to be seen and to have these opportunities. Having a family and children, most of the times are also on a barrier, because our system is not made to this woman, and the sport calendar is very difficult. So with whom they will leave the children, and most of the times the responsibility to take care of the children is from the woman. So it's another thing that they understand as a barrier. But for the other side, when we are trying to understand who those women are, they are very qualified. So even they being very qualified, they have graduation, they have post graduation, some of them have masters, but they still don't have this opportunity to work and to show how good they are.
Mhm. Yeah, that's having this information is like the key to understand what is the core of the problem. So I think, as you said, having this kind of research and data from our region will help a lot to try to increase and improve the efforts to have more female representation within the sport industry. And how do you promote the participation of women in key roles within the sports system? That is apart from female athletes. Do you have separate programs for female sport managers, for example, or coaches, and or for referees as well?
Yeah, we have some initiatives. So the Brazilian law today, it says that the sport organizations needs to have 30% of women in their executive board. So it's something that the government is helping is guiding the organizations. So to receive the budget from the lotteries, you need to have some some structure, and one of them is 30% of women in the executive board. So it's something good. We implemented last year a rule to our national federations that every international game, they have to have 30% of women as their technical commission. So we are now going to the Junior Pan American Games in August, and the national federations have to have 30% of women in their technical commissions. So this is kind of changing their way to look to this woman, but we are also helping them to qualify this woman. So we have one woman in sports, woman female coaches programs, which we call MIRA. So last year we had 10 female coaches from different sports, volleyball, judo, sailing, and we work with them for 8 months doing a mentoring program to try to help them to develop and to face these barriers that they face in their lives as coaches. And it was very, very good program. We now are expanding it. So this year we're going to have 20 coaches. We are now in the middle of the selection process. We had 75 subscriptions. And we now have this challenge to understand which ones of them we are gonna do this mentoring program until December. And probably next year we have a mentoring program for managers as well. So we every year we are expanding our portfolio of projects, you know. So we already have programs with national federations, with female coaches. Now we're going to implement the female managers, and we are trying to support all the system, so we have more women in every position within the sports system.
Excellent. Congratulations on that. And let me ask you about the funding for this kind of initiative. You received this funding from the International Olympic Committee, from the government, from private sector. Tell us about that.
Yeah, most of the funding we have is from the government. So we have the lottery law in Brazil, which gives lots of budget for the sports, and the Brazil Olympic Committee shares this budget with national federations and with some internal projects. So we have this resource in the Brazil Olympic Committee, but we are also using budget from the IOC. So we have budget from the technical courses program from the Olympic Solidarity. We have some budget from Pan Sports for our Women in Sports Commission. So we are doing both things. We also have some sponsors from the Olympic Committee, which they are now very interested in supporting female athletes and female sports. So some of these sponsors focus on our project. So we will also have some support from them.
Excellent. Thank you for that valuable information. Let's move on to a different topic. You also participated in a study related to analyze the number of female coaches in high performance sports. Tell us a little bit about this study, please.
Yes, this is the thing that I was talking before. We see this low number of women as coaches in Olympic Games and other international games. So globally, when we look to these numbers, we have 13% of women as coaches in these high performance events like the Olympic Games. In Brazil, we had 7% of women in Rio, 6% in Tokyo, and now 12 in Paris. So we are following these numbers, understand which sports have more women and less women, and try to help them to develop this woman so we can achieve the expected number of 30% of women that the IOC implements, and we are also doing this with our national federations. So there is a huge challenge yet in this field. Women as coaches, as referees, as managers, but we are working on it helping the national federations to identify this woman, because sometimes they don't know the women that are there. So within that women's sport development program that we talked in the beginning, some national federations are trying to discover their female coaches. So they are running a huge research, asking those women to talk to them. So who are you? How experienced you are? How are you working today? So they can implement some strategies specific to this woman. So we had a huge research in triathlon, with surfing, with swimming. So we are helping the national federations to understand their public and then to implement some strategies to them.
Excellent. And does this initiative has something to do with any IOC initiative?
The program that we are developing female coaches, so MIRA, Women in Sport Development. Last year and this year, we have this support from the Olympic Committee. They just delivered a report talking about good practice to foster women in sports. And we are there with this program. They recognize us as a good program to develop women coaches. These both programs that we are talking about, the MIRA coaches and the Women in Sport Development with international federations, are highlighted in this report from the IOC, and we are very proud of it.
Yeah, congratulations again on that, because you are teaching the whole region that that kind of programs are actually very effective, and we need it. And by showing these numbers and the results to all our audience, also we are learning about your own experience. And Tassi, looking ahead, Lima 2027 Pan American Games, and later on Los Angeles 2028 Olympic Games, what lessons from your work we can apply to ensure or promote more and better female participation at all levels in the sport industry?
I think we have many things to do, and we are trying as much as we can, but we still have a lot to implement and a lot of areas to cover. So one area that we need to cover as soon as possible when we are starting to do something like this is about sports science. We know that most of the research in sports were made with men, and we need this data to understand our athletes and to train female athletes as female athletes. So we are doing some research about this as well. We have a group of sports gynecologists. So these doctors are working with all our female athletes to understand their menstrual cycle and how it impacts their performance. And we are collecting some data and making different approach with them. So I think this is very important, and it is a path that we have to follow, you know. About the female coaches, one more time. In Santiago, we had only 15% of women as female coaches, and we have to increase this number. So those kind of programs that we are doing about researching, mentoring these coaches, supporting the national federations, we hope that we will have a different number of coaches in Lima 2027 and in Los Angeles 2028. Of our women athletes, who have lots to do as well, like performance and sport science, as I said, but also to have more, to give more support so more athletes can qualify for the games, and to have more athletes competing in high level and bring to us more medals. I think that now the moment is just running for these female sports medals, and many countries already understood that if they invest in the female athletes, they can bring more medals. So we as in Paris, we had 3 female gold medals. We have to work a lot to have more. And I think it's this kind of thing that we have to do. And using research and the universities to support us, I think it's one of the best things that we made in the last few years. To use the knowledge that are inside the universities and the professionals who are there understanding and studying and analyzing sports to help us to implement programs that are science-based. I think the important thing that we have now is that we can do sport management, science-based, and with the support from the universities.
Yeah, of course. And regarding the leading roles or leading positions of females leading the sport industry, do you have any data of the percentage of female authorities taking the role in the Brazilian scenario?
Yeah, we had actually we have now less women as president of national federations that we used to have in the last Olympic cycle. Now we have only one woman as president of one national federation, but we have now more female women as vice president. So we launched a report in 2022 with these numbers, and now that we had a change of presidency of most of the federations, we will run another research to understand this data better. But even in the Brazil Olympic Committee, for the first time, we have a woman as vice president. So we see that the things are changing, maybe not so fast as we wanted, but we understand as well that these positions as vice president and president of national federations, it's hard to achieve there. So we have to make long changes, for a while, so this woman can achieve these directory positions and then go to these presidencies.
Yeah, completely. And I'm completely convinced that representation matters. So that is important that female athletes, referees, and authorities take the lead to change our system, our current system. So thank you
Yes.
for sharing this information with us. We're almost finishing this conversation, but to close this conversation, what message would you share with the students, sport managers, and professionals who are seeking to foster a more inclusive and equitable sports culture that are viewing this conversation today?
Yeah, I think it's to understand that women, they are different. They are not only women, they are black women, white women, indigenous women. We are different, so we cannot put everybody in the same box, We have to understand the diversity of women that we have, and that all the environment brings new support system or some barriers. So we have to look to this system and try to understand what's happening for those women to cannot be there at this space. For a long time we heard that the women were not able to be there, that they didn't want to be there, and this is not true. We want to be there, we are able to be there, but we need opportunities. So I think that the message is just to give opportunity to these women, support them, and they will show that they can do whatever you want.
Excellent, Tassi. Thank you again for sharing this very important information with us. And if the audience would like to know a little bit more about your research, how we can find it or how we can access to this information that you share with us?
Yes, as they are part of a doctoral program.
Uh-huh.
They are not published yet, so very soon it will be published. But we are happy to share if you can send some part of the data, some presentation we can do. So maybe you can share our email and we can talk. And we are open here to talk with whoever wants to speak with us.
Excellent. So maybe we are going to put your social media information in this recording. And thank you again, Tassi, for your participation in this Women and Sports Summit 2025. You have offered valuable perspective on how your work in a sport institution such as the Brazilian Olympic Committee, and your research efforts are shaping a fairer future in sports. Thank you very much once again, and see you soon.
Thank you to Tatiana and Juan for bringing us a grounded and regionally relevant perspective. And I want to take a moment to thank all of you for joining us on this journey across continents, voices, and visions for a more inclusive future in sport. Thank you for being here.
Queridos estudiantes participantes e investigadores de todo el mundo, desde la carrera de Administración y Negocios del Deporte y el Centro de Estudios e Investigaciones Olímpicos de la UPC, les agradecemos por acompañarnos en este Women and Sport Summit 2025 sobre olimpismo y la equidad de género. Hoy hemos compartido valiosos conocimientos provenientes desde Australia, de Brasil, Francia y Estados Unidos, que muestran cómo el deporte y el movimiento olímpico avanzan hacia una mayor equidad de género, desde diferentes miradas y contextos. Sus aportes, como el trabajo del profesor Eric Monin de la Universidad Marie-Louis Pasteur sobre la educación olímpica en Francia y la necesidad de fortalecer la gobernanza femenina en los espacios de gobernanza, el análisis del profesor Joab Dubinsky de la Universidad de Oregon de Estados Unidos sobre el branding de nación y la diplomacia en el mundo post-pandémico, destacando el impacto positivo del título 9, impulsando una mayor representación femenina en los Juegos Olímpicos, así como el estudio de la profesora Adele Pavlidis de la Universidad de Griffith de Australia. Nos habla sobre cómo el roller derby desafía las normas de género en el deporte, examinando el empoderamiento femenino y la identidad de género en el deporte. Y por último, las reflexiones de la profesora Tatiana Pinto de la Universidad de Tsukuba de Japón y desde el Comité Olímpico Brasilero. Nos hablaba de la importancia de la participación deportiva de las mujeres en todos los niveles del sistema deportivo brasilero. Todos esos conocimientos nos brindan valiosos insights fundamentales para construir un deporte más inclusivo y justo. Este momento es solo un paso en el camino que transitaremos desde los Juegos de París 2024, pasando por los Juegos de Lima 2027 y hasta los Juegos de Los Ángeles 2028, pero también hacia un futuro donde la igualdad de género sea una realidad en cada rincón de la industria deportiva y sobre todo en nuestra sociedad. Además, como coordinador del Centro de Estudios e Investigación Olímpicos de la UPC, quiero destacar la importancia que tienen la investigación académica y científica y la producción de conocimiento especializado en el desarrollo deportivo y del movimiento olímpico, más aún en nuestra región. Nuevamente, muchas gracias por su interés, su participación, su compromiso con esta causa tan importante y por acompañarnos en esta edición 2025 del Women and Sport Summit. Nos vemos muy pronto.